just recorded audio. So.
That's true. So today's part 2 of a series of 2 in this sermon.
Just 2?
Just 2. And I thought you were going to preach. So what happened?
Well, I was going to preach, but the more I thought about talking about what a fresh wineskin for the church looked like, because we kind of talked about fresh wine and fresh wineskin in terms of being a Christian, follower of Jesus last week, but the more I thought about that, I just thought that it seemed to me like a topic, something seemed better explored in conversation to me, and I just thought that this kind of fell into that category and that it was better as a conversation. And I honestly thought, and then maybe we'll, at some point later, we'll throw it out as an episode on the Jesus at the Table podcast so that more people outside our church can benefit from this conversation, because I think this is a conversation that needs to be happening across the church. So, yeah.
So you should have brought the Jesus in the pot at the
table.
We
should have had our
Jesus
at the Table mugs.
Right.
Yeah, we didn't think of that. So.
Yeah. All right, so
our swag. Our
swag. I think we should get T-shirts or something.
Yeah, something.
Oh, I'm getting feedback.
Yeah.
Can you help
Bob's
us
working
out?
on it.
Thank you. So for anybody who didn't hear part 1 last week that you kind of referenced just a second ago, can you recap? Because I feel like for people to get this, they need to have heard that.
Yeah. So Christian voices are loud in our culture and have been loud for a while in our culture. And so a lot of Christians are shouting loudly into the culture about what they think Christianity is about, but not all of it sounds like the new wine Jesus brought, which would, another simpler way to say that would be, because I love that metaphor of the new wine, but just how Jesus was with people and what he taught. A lot of it doesn't look like that and doesn't sound like that. So we desperately need to find that new wine again. We desperately need to make sure that what we're drinking and sharing is what Jesus had in mind. And when we find that new wine again, when we embrace Jesus' own way and teaching and his heart, the wineskin is going to look different. Like what it looks like coming out of my life or coming together and out of a church community, that's going to look different, just as it did with Jesus' disciples, which is why they were so criticized by the religious people. If you remember the story we read last week, where Jesus uses that metaphor, and they come and they say, why do your disciples, why are they doing it? Why are they living this religion, this faith? Why are they living it differently? And Jesus says, well, because this is new wine, this is different wine, and we put it in your old wineskins, they're just going to burst. So the wineskin's going to look different, and my life is the wineskin, and this together is the wineskin.
Okay, so you could have talked about faith in America and new wine and kind of left it at that. Why are you bringing it into the church as a theme?
Just because, as I said last week, to use Jesus' analogy, the wine is the substance of our faith, and that's what I talked about last week. What is the substance, right? What is it we are about in our hearts and our thinking, in our relationships and the way we relate to various groups of people as followers of Jesus? That's the wine, the substance. But the wineskin is, well, really the piece of it we're going to talk about today, the wineskin is sort of what we live out corporately and communally together as the community of Jesus. And so, let me be blunt. The church in our culture is driving people away from Jesus in many cases. Mm-hmm. We have a wineskin problem. So we can't just talk about the wine and everybody say, yeah, Jesus, yay. Yeah. We have to say, well, but what would that look like? And would anybody here or around the church or who is watching the church say, now that's different and that seems better? Would anybody,
Yeah, because you don't see a whole lot of that.
In fact, I would say
right
the
now.
Church is being watched by the broader culture more than ever before in my adult life. So we might want to talk about the wineskin.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah.
So obviously we're going to talk about all of this in reference to our church, but I think you need to kind of zoom out a little bit and think about the overall church landscape. So I want to ask you first, how's the wineskin of the church these days? You kind of just touched on that just a little bit. And what do you see when you look out at church across the culture?
At least in part because of the impression that Christians and the church have been making on the culture, there are more and more people out there who, even in the church, who are realizing that something doesn't seem Jesus-like, and then what that's doing is it's heating up the conversations. Maybe you all, I don't know, don't tune into this stuff, but I do. I listen to what pastors and theologians are saying and the conversations that church leaders are having across the culture. It's heating up this conversation about what authentic Christianity looks like and what the church should be like, in the way it lives these things out. And so more and more people are realizing, even within the church, and I put myself in this category, that some of the, I'm just going to call them the old perspectives and approaches that we've had are not helping people to see and fall in love with Jesus and his way. And so that's off. And a lot more people are recognizing, even Christians within the church are saying, it's off. Something's not the way, it doesn't taste like Jesus wine.
Right.
So
talk about some of those impressions and perspectives.
Okay, well, there's quite a few, and we've talked about these before. I've talked about them in sermons, and of course, we've only dropped 2 podcasts so far, but probably even talked about a little bit on this recent one. But I'll give you a few. A lot of people have, impressions that Christians in the church are making on the culture. So there's a big perception that Christians are very, very judgmental in general, that's one of our best features, so to speak, one of our strongest features. There's a big perception about that we are the people who are against a lot of other groups. Like if you went out in the culture and you said, name the groups Christians against, most people could name a few groups. They'd say they were against these people and these people and these people and these people. So that's a big thing. The marriage of Christianity and one brand of politics. The idea that the prime directive is to save America as a Christian. We've had this rise of Christian nationalism, to save America and run America as a Christian nation and make everybody around us bow down to a very detailed Christian ethos and ethic, and to do that through political power. There's a lot of that, and people are very aware of it. I mean, when the New York Times and the Atlantic Monthly are writing articles about it, people are very about Christians and what they're trying. I mean, people are very, very aware of those things. The sense that we as Christians are defined more by what we're against than what we're for. There's a huge perception of that. People perceive rightly that many Christians have been resistant to social justice issues, that Christians are the one resisting conversations about racial equality, resisting conversations about the equality and dignity of women, resisting dealing with the abuse of women in the church. I mean, again, when the New York Times is writing articles about Christian denominations, whether Catholic or evangelical, covering up abuse in their ranks, you go, yeah, that's probably not really painting the best picture of Jesus, is it? So all these kind of things. And then just scandals related to church leadership. It's actually gotten worse. It was bad a while back, and then it's worse again in recent years. Just scandals of power-hungry Christian leaders. We've seen a whole string of those, been in the national news, and scandals involving, again, like the abuse of women in the church, and all kinds of things. And my point is this: none of those things are making people hungry for Jesus and falling in love with his way. And the fact that I can sit up here and list all that, and, is like, yikes. So
right. So against all that background, you think that there's something that we've missed about church. Maybe let's refer to it as the paradigm.
Yeah.
So what do you think that looks like? What do you think that should look like?
I do think there's this basic thing we've missed about church. And of course, if you asked me 20 or 30 years ago, I couldn't have said to you what I'm going to share with you this morning. But I do think there's something big we've missed about church. I don't think it's just that we got something wrong on this issue or this issue or this issue. We have gotten some things not very Jesus-y on a bunch of issues. But I think there's something deeper. I think that there are some things about the way many of us came to think about church over, well, in my life, the last few decades, but certainly it probably goes back further than that. And I think we need a different paradigm for thinking about the church. And I'm going to kind of try to share that with everybody. Mm-hmm. And so I came across this thing years ago, and I wasn't going to talk about this today until we were at dinner the other night with some new friends who are here this morning. And what I'm going to share with you, I drew on the back of a restaurant receipt while we were in the restaurant, because it's something I've been thinking about for years, and I'm going to share it with you.
Must have been a really long receipt, because see, right here I put long narrative.
Long narrative. No, the diagrams were simple. And it comes from something in social science, and I got exposed to this years ago, but I've been applying it to my thinking about the Christian community now for years. It comes from something called, the social scientists talk about, called social set theory, which is just this idea that there are different ways that groups organize themselves around different things. And as I talk about this, some of you are going to be like, is this like a class? This is like, it's going to feel technical a little bit maybe to you. But two things. If you stick with me as I explain this, you're going to see how it gets us to Jesus. That's the first thing. And the second thing is you're going to feel smarter when we're done, right? And so that's fun, right? So you go, I know all about social set theory. So, okay, so this is the thing. So I'm going to talk about 3 ways to think about social groups, and we're going to apply them to the church. So the first is what they call the fuzzy set group. So the fuzzy set group looks like that. It's a group of people who want to be a community. Now, this could be friends in a neighborhood. It could be a religious group. It could be some kind of a civic or community organization. It could be anything. And they don't really have anything big that they're about. They just like being together. They're not chasing anything in particular together. There isn't something that particularly binds them together beyond their desire to be together. So what holds them together is, as the word says, it's fuzzy. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing. Not being critical of fuzzy set groups. We probably all socially are part of fuzzy set groups. But it's just, and religiously, I would say, like if you were talking about a fuzzy set group would be a group of people who feel like, kind of want to have faith and be spiritual, but it's vague. It's not too specific. And I don't mean this overly critical. Think maybe something like a Unitarian church, where it's, hey, whatever you believe is okay. We're not telling you got to believe anything specific or chase anything specific spiritually, but we're all a little spiritual, so we kind of want to be together. That's a fuzzy set group. So the reason a fuzzy set group doesn't work well for us as Christians is that we believe that God has revealed himself in Jesus Christ and made known a new path of life for us, a new path into real life for us, and that's something specific. So a fuzzy set group is like, well, there's nothing really specific we have to chase. So if you have a church that's a fuzzy set group, a lot of us Christians are going to be like, aren't we supposed to be going somewhere? Aren't we supposed to be on a journey towards something specific? It seems awfully fuzzy. The second group is what sociologists call a bounded set group. So a bounded set group is sort of in some ways the opposite extreme. So the bounded set group is nice and clear. It has a hard line around who's in the community, and it says if you want to be in this community, then you have to be good with everything that comprises that hard line. And that will determine whether you can be in our community or out of our community. So it's very rigid. And for Christians, it could be things like so you might wonder, like, well, if this was a church, if this picture represented a church, what comprises that hard line? Well, what comprises the hard line is things like, do you have the right faith formula, right? Like different churches talk about how a person should come to faith or what it means to be a real Christian. So are you sure you're really in the faith? Do you have the right faith formula? That kind of thing. It could be, do you have the right doctrinal views? Like you could go to church and they could say, well, this is a Calvinist church, not an Arminian church. And if you don't believe in Calvinist predestination, then you would be outside our group. You can't be inside our group because we all know that's the truth. That's what they would say. We all know that's true. Or it could be we're a non-charismatic church versus a charismatic church. So if you're a charismatic person, we don't believe in all that Holy Spirit stuff. So it's not going to work for you in our church. So you wouldn't be able to be inside our church comfortably. We probably wouldn't be comfortable having you here. Or it could be like we've had people come to church here, and when they've seen that we allow women leaders, they've said, oh, all the churches I've been in, part of the hard line was no women leaders. Can't have women leaders. So, some of those people eventually said, hey, women leaders is kind of cool, and some of them left because they thought, no, you have to have a hard line that says no women leaders. But my real point isn't all those sort of issues, doctrinal issues. It's just that lots of churches, lots of what we do is that's one of the things, is we have very specific beliefs on all these things. Not just a belief in Jesus and his redemption and his salvation, but all these other things. And to be a part of our church, you have to agree with all of it. That's what defines being in our group. But there's more than that. right? Like we were talking about that this morning, the old, as seen on TV commercials. Wait, there's more, right? So there's also like your views. Do you line up with our views on cultural issues, right? There's a lot of debated cultural issues. If you don't think the exact same way we think about all these issues, you're not going to fit in our church community. Or political preferences. I know many churches today where if you don't line up with where 99% of that church is politically, they're going to let you know, like, you're probably not a real Christian. You don't fit here. We don't define Christianity. We define Christianity as attached to that. Or it could be moral behavior questions. Like, in the earlier days of our faith, it was like if you went to a church, it was like, well, if you think it's okay for a person to have a beer or a glass of wine, that's not going to work in our church because we know that anybody who does that's probably going to hell. So that's part of our rigid, you think I'm joking, but I'm not. So that's part of our rigid line. So this is what makes a bounded set group is everything is very, like this. And as a result, what happens in a bounded set group is that people are often judged and excluded before they can get near enough to explore what Jesus is like. Because as they approach the church community, here's the grid of these 20 or 30 things. Do you fit? And they go, well, and maybe they're already sort of being judged on the basis of, well, you don't think the right way or you don't do this the right way. And then the other thing that happens that's just kind of a fringe benefit, but not a good one, is in bounded set churches, everybody's expected to think exactly alike about every little thing. It's conformity. That's what makes us us, is that we all conform to this stuff. We all conform to everything that this line is comprised of. Then there's long narrative, right? So then there's what they call a centered set group. So it probably doesn't take a genius to look at the centered set diagram and say that for us as Christians, so a centered set, instead of having a hard line, or it could even be like a dotted circle maybe, a centered set group says there's something at the middle that we're all moving toward. But we don't draw a hard line that tells everybody if you don't think and act in these 30 ways, you can't be a part of the group, because we want people to be drawn toward whatever it is at the middle. And so we say anybody who wants to hang out with us and move toward that, well, you could do that. So it doesn't take a genius to figure out for us as Christians, that would probably be Jesus, I would think, at the center in his heart and his way. So I'm going to take you back to the bounded set for a minute because I want to explain something to you. The deeper problem with the bounded set, Karen, if you can go to that next. There you go. The deeper problem with the bounded set is that the things that comprise that rigid line that defines who's in and who's out, and you have to line up with all these things, that becomes a substitution for Jesus because it defines our Christianity. We say this Christianity is that line, comprised of all those things. What your politics is, what your cultural views are, your secondary doctrinal views, whether you smoke or drink or whatever, but all these things, this is Christianity. That's the message. So it becomes a substitute for Jesus, and that's the problem, because we're saying these things are what it's all about, that this collection of stuff is Christianity, which it isn't. And the church becomes this place where we think, and you probably have either been to a church like this or known a church like this, the church becomes this place where we begin to think that our mission is defending that line. Our mission is defending that line because Christianity is comprised of all these views that we're sure we figured out exactly the right way. But let's ask this. What happens if we erase the hard perimeter, or you could even make it a dotted line, whatever you want to do, and we said, yeah, we all have our opinions, right, on doctrinal questions and cultural issues, and we have our political preferences and what we think is healthy or unhealthy for Christians to do. Like we have all those, but what happens if we say, but those aren't the center? The center is Jesus. And not just Jesus like, because you can say the center is Jesus and everybody goes, yeah. No, but the center is like Jesus, as we see Jesus in the Gospels, right? We always say that. Talking about the Jesus we find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. His heart, his way, his love, the kind of truth he's actually concerned about, his way with people, his bent toward mercy rather than judge, like all these things about Jesus. What if we said, well, Jesus is actually, the center, and this is, interestingly enough, and a lot of you know this, this is actually what the New Testament tells us. Hebrews 12:2. Therefore, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the completer of our faith. Or in Ephesians 1, when Paul says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, so that you may see how wide and long and deep and high is the substance of the 30 opinions I have about everything. No, that you may see, right? That you may see how wide and long and deep and high is the love of Christ. And you go, oh. And, this is a huge question for the church. Like, what are we inviting people to? Because we're not inviting people even to Pastor Fran's collection of opinions, because he's right about every little thing. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me. Not a circle line comprised of 20 or 30 things that we call Christianity. Jesus said, he who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Oh my gosh. Anybody want the light of life? I want the light of life. Yeah. 5 of you raised your hand. I'm just being goofy. I know, yes. The beauty of the church being a centered set is that we can have all kinds of people at all kinds of places in their understandings and their experience of the journey, with everyone welcome. And we're holding up Jesus at the center, and we know that some people have been on a really good journey for a long time. They might be standing really close to Jesus in the diagram. Other people are further out, and their journey's been back and forth, but they know that they want the life and the everything that Jesus offers. Other people are maybe further at the perimeter, maybe some of you who are new here, and you're like, I'm just starting to understand this stuff and look in Jesus' direction. And what defines us isn't that we're saying to everybody who walks through the door, who draws near to us, hey, we got this really rigid line comprised of all these things, and you're welcome here, but we hope in the next 2 weeks you can subscribe to all of them and change your minds on all the ones that you might not currently hold to. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, look, because he's got the life. He's got the goodness. He is beautiful. And wherever you are with that, if you're here and you're willing to gaze on that sunrise of the good and beautiful God with us, we're pretty excited that you're here. And it's a different way of thinking about things. So don't you feel smart now that you know all about social set theory? And of course, I'm joking, but I hope you can see it's a really different paradigm. And I hope you can see how much of the church that I've been a part of in my adult life, has been a bounded set paradigm. And the people who are holding tightly to that at this moment in our culture, they're not helping people to see and fall in love with Jesus and his way. But there might be something to that.
Yep. So you have this community looking at Jesus rather than an ironclad opinion on, well, pretty much everything. So where does that take us?
I don't know. Well, no, that's the beauty of it, because where it takes us, brace yourself for this, where it takes us is to actually look at Jesus. And again, people are going to say, well, yeah, we're Christians, of course. But what have a lot of people been looking at? They've been looking at the 20 or 30 things that comprise the rigid circle, right? That's different from looking at Jesus. So where it takes us is looking at Jesus. And so we say, well, what does Jesus think? What were Jesus' attitudes about these kind of things? What did Jesus do with people? What did Jesus say God loved and was important to God? What kind of journey did Jesus seem to be describing that we should be on? It takes us to ask those questions. Because we get into this thing, and I've been there myself as a follower of Christ, we get into this thing where we say, we know all the answers to that, and we wrote them all down, and we made that circle out of them. We already know. And once you do that, you stop saying, and we saw people do it a lot with like the whole political thing in the last few years. Once you do that, you stop saying, well, I think I know, but I think I'll go ask Jesus again. I think I'll go wonder about Jesus again with this stuff, So,
yeah, looking through that Jesus lens at everything.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. What do you think people might object to about having this perspective?
Well, and I already am hearing it about our church. here's what
I'm
people...
glad you get the emails.
Right. Here's not from people within our church. It's a whole new experience, because we're doing more stuff like this and the podcast and some of the things I've preached in the last few years. A new experience for me. I'm okay with it, but a new experience is, I'm finding there are people out there watching like what we do on video and stuff for ammunition now because they're so sure we're these terrible people and these terrible Christians. And it just kind of, it's in some ways it's funny, in some ways you just kind of go, okay, you can't control what people like. But here's what it is. Here's what it is. Because what people do is they say, well, if you erase that rigid circle, or even if you say, well, we have some things we're pretty sure of, so make it a dotted line. But it's not ironclad, and we don't use it to gatekeep people in and out, right? They say, well, now you just don't have any standards at all. And that's what they misunderstand. We're changing the standard from everything that we were so sure of, right? You guys have heard me quote it, 1 Corinthians 8:1. Paul says, the one who thinks he knows should take heed, for he does not yet know as he ought. We are all still learning. So instead of saying our reference point is all that stuff we were, so sure we were sure of, we're saying that the standard is the heart and teaching of God revealed in Jesus. Oh. So if someone says, well, you just don't have any standards at all, I got a huge standard. His name is Jesus. It's huge.
Right.
Right? So it's a misunderstanding.
Okay.
Yeah.
So looking at new wineskins, what does that look like for this community as it evolves?
I think if we had time, I think some of you actually could probably answer that question this morning as well as I can, because I think you can feel parts of it in our church. Like you can feel the acceptance of people, right? Right? Church has rejected a lot of people. You can feel the acceptance of people here, and you go, oh, that's a new wineskin, right? And it's focused on the journey of being made new, which we've been about that for a long time. We just keep getting a deeper understanding of what, free, whole, and good looks like as Jesus, because that's what he's doing with us. He's taking us into freedom and wholeness and goodness. So it's that focus on that kind of a journey of being made new. It's wondering more deeply about love between us and out of us, as out of our lives and out of our community. It's the transparency and open-heartedness that people sense around here. It's the theological reflection that goes on around here. We're not just saying like, we read our Bible and we have everything figured out. Around here we have conversations like, so as Christians we all say that God is good, 100% good. What does that mean? What does that look like? Because sometimes Christians describe God in ways that don't seem good. And then you go, so what does that mean that God is 100% good? It's saying what we've been saying this morning. We're going to look to Jesus. All of those things are, I would say, to me feel like parts of the new wineskin of what we're becoming. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
All right, so don't get mad at me for this question, okay?
Okay.
Are there any LifeSpring challenges that you want to talk about?
A couple.
Thought you might.
Yeah, there are LifeSpring challenges. Like many of you are new here, and we did that survey. How do you want to connect? You're looking for a smaller group to be a part of, and lots of you said yes, yes, yes. So the challenge of helping those of you who are new find your people here, find your little place of connection, community, your small group or whatever that is. So we're working on that hard because we know that that's a crucial thing. A church feels beautiful to you when it's your people. And but that's a challenge, right? That's a challenge. The weird unfolding of what I call the sort of momentum resource interplay, and you're probably thinking like, what is that? So it's this. Like
I understood this one.
You did? Yeah. Well, yeah, because you're in all the meetings where we're talking about the momentum resource interplay. So God's doing beautiful things here. All these new people. I mean, how he shaped, I don't know, how we think and what our hearts are about and what we want to hold out to others. We're going to be doing some things to make LifeSpring known this fall and invite more people into this beautiful thing that's happening here. And so we have this really good, wonderful momentum. But, those of you who are new don't know this, and I'm not going to talk about finances this morning. You'll hear some more about that next week. But at last year's fall breakfast, do you know what we said to our community, those of you who are new? We said, the money is dwindling away. We're not sure we'll be here in a year. We may have to just give this building back to the bank and blah, blah, blah. Now, we've turned that corner. And we'll talk about that next week, and we'll talk about a bunch of things with that next week. But as there's momentum, there is need to do things. Some of those things cost money. Some of those things need new leaders. And we're looking around these days going, well, who are our next leaders or helpers to help us do some of this important ministry? So that's what I mean by the momentum, like good things happen. This is what it is. Good things happen, and then we as leaders go, well, how are we going to do that? Do we have the money? Do we have leaders or people to come alongside us and help us? And then we find a solution, and then good things happen, and we go, how are we going to do that? So it feels like this, but all going in a good direction. But it's a challenge, without a doubt, yeah. And maybe there may be a couple of, I think, Achilles' heels, too, of the moment we're in. One is, I think that there are, and obviously we're not a huge church, but there are growing pains that happen when you grow as a church. And so those things sometimes stretch people. They sometimes make it stressful for leaders because they're trying to solve a problem or figure out what to do next about something, right? And so one of the Achilles' heels is all of us as leaders. I'm talking all of us, including me. We all have to just take a deep breath and say, this is beautiful what God's doing. So let's just remember that this is God's thing, and let's do it and go with it and say, Lord, where are you taking it? The other Achilles' heel is, how do I talk about this? So I need my hands. Sorry, I'm not even Italian. It's easy to talk about better thinking about following Jesus. It's easy to talk about better thinking about being the community of Jesus. Many of you are in processes where you've been rethinking some of the Christian truths and ideas you were taught, and you're on your own journey of deconstruction, reconstruction. I call it remodeling. And we can talk about all those things as principles, as ideas or ideology or theology, and it can be fascinating conversation and helpful. A lot of it's really helpful conversation, I think, in our community. But we have to remember, in all of that, as we're trying to straighten out our thinking about God, which is a journey many of us have been on, we have to remember that beyond that is the mystical presence of Christ himself. We have to remember that. This isn't just the move from one ideology to another, or trading in some of your old Christian ideology for some new ideology. That's not going to save us. It's not going to restore me as a human being. What's going to restore me as a human being is the healing and teaching and from Jesus himself and the work of his Spirit as he lives in me and dwells in me. It is he who lives in me who banishes my fears and takes me into new wholeness as a human being. And so I want us, as a church, as we go forward, we're going to keep having lots of conversations about what is God like, and what is the Christian journey, and what is he making us into as people. But we must move beyond conversations about that to the presence of Christ. Even as we worship this morning, when you come to communion this morning, presence of Christ. Christ is with you. Christ is in you. And he is the fountain of life. And if we lose that, and I see some churches doing it, everybody's deconstructing and they're moving from this ideology to this ideology. But that's not enough.
Okay, so last question then. As our pastor, how do you feel as we walk into this season or continue on this path of changing and becoming as a church? And I did talk with my hands because I am Italian, just saying.
Can I back up and say one other thing before you do the last question?
Yep.
I thought about this when I was talking about, and I'm just sort of being funny, but about, when God begins to rework how you think about him, then people who think in other ways sometimes, are suspicious of that or critical of that. And I get that. Everybody's on their own journey. Everybody doesn't have to think like me or like you or whatever, But one of the things that, and this has come to me from 4 or 5 sources now, not people in our church, outside, pastor friends, other people, friends of friends, family of friends, whatever, Because people are saying like, oh, I'm going to this church and this is what it's about and, blah, 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 blah. So then people are like, I don't know about that. So, go to our website, they listen to a sermon, or they watch a podcast, or they do whatever, right? And so the most interesting comment to me, and again, it's come from 4 or 5 sources, is people have said the problem with that church is that it's just this idea that God is just all love. So, and here's what they're saying, and I understand it, and I'm not being disrespectful. What they're saying is they don't care about sin or truth, or you want to talk about sin? I'll have a long conversation with you. I believe in sin, and I believe truth matters, and I believe there's good and evil and healthy and unhealthy. We're just hanging out with Jesus as we talk about those things and try to understand those things. So, but when I started to hear that come back, like, well, you're just saying God is all love, and that's problematic. So maybe somebody will say that to you about our church at some point. So I'd like to read something to you. It's in the Bible. It's in 1 John chapter 4. God is love. Notice it doesn't say God loves, as if it's just a verb, something he does, or something that's, God is love, and he who abides in love abides in God, and God in him. Love has been completed among us in this, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, which is love, so are we in this world. Now listen. Here's what it is. They want you, the great they out there, I'm not trying to be whatever toward people, but they want you to be afraid that if you sin, God will pour his wrath out on you and come against you. And they think that if you talk about God just being love, you're forgetting that God is ready to, when you sin, and they think you need that kind of a, not a healthy, like what the Old Testament called the fear of the Lord. They think you need that healthy terror of the Lord, right? So listen to the rest of this passage. There is no fear in love. But perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment. You hear what John is saying? We've moved past that view of God. God isn't up there saying, I'll love you today, I'll whack you tomorrow. There's no fear in punishment. God's out to grow you up. He's out to discipline you, correct you, because he's trying to get you to free, whole, and good, but he's not out to retributively punish you. God is love, and there is no fear in love, because fear has to do with punishment. And we have moved past the idea that God is out to swat us for our sins. He's out to make us free, whole, and good. Very different. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment. He who fears has not yet been completed in love. I hate to break it to you, but God is all love. Only took me about 30 years of my Christian journey to get there. So, all right, last question.
I already asked you the last question.
What was it?
My last question is, as our pastor, how do you feel as we continue this journey of changing and becoming as a church community?
I'm so excited about the flourishing here of beautiful faith, new wine kind of faith, of beautiful relationships between people, of all this focus on what it really is, right? Jesus came so that he could restore us, so that he could bury away, as we talked about in baptism, the person we would have been apart from this journey with him, and raise us up into new human beings. So I'm so excited about that. Like, it's so hard to put into words. Like, you ever have that feeling as you move from one way of thinking into some better things that you wonder if it's really okay? It's so beautiful. Then I have these moments where I go, is this okay? Not because I doubt what we believe or the direction we're going, but because it's like, this is what it is. Because you've been living in a cave for a long time, you know the sunrise was this beautiful. And then you're like, the sunrise really is this beautiful, isn't it? It's really this beautiful. So I'm really excited. And at the same time, I have some, if I'm honest, some trepidation. I'm a human being just like the rest of you guys. So anytime you go into new territory, and this is what it is. The unknown is a double-edged sword. Like, I look out at our future at LifeSpring and I say, wow, if this is what we see today and God is this beautiful, what, it's like that line from Men in Black. Imagine what you'll know tomorrow. Like the sunrise is only going to rise higher in the sky. Like the unknown is like, let's go sailing. It's beautiful. But then there's also that part that you're like, so what's going to happen as we sail out there, right? What's going to happen with LifeSpring, and are we going to be able to figure out all the solutions to the little, mechanics things around church, the things that need to happen well and better, and as we invite new people in, will we be able to help them? All those kind of things. So it's like, yes, and then you go, okay. So.
But what do I always say?
What? Yeah.
We got this.
Yeah. So I just hope that, as I've talked last week and we've talked this morning, that new wine and new wineskins, you see how that image is kind of the journey that we're on here. And I think it's the journey the church, the big C, the church in our culture, desperately needs. And oddly, I think God has used this last few years of pandemic, cultural upheaval, political upheaval to actually pour gas on the fire for a lot of us of like finding Jesus again in a more solid way.
Yeah.
Weirdly.
Yeah, well, you know what? Sometimes all of those pieces come together exactly how they're supposed to.
Yeah.
So we just want to thank you guys for helping us think about all of these things this morning and kind of letting him do a flow of conscious conversation.